A very happy Thursday, everyone, and welcome to Fantasy Football Today, DFS. It's week 2. We got a long way to go, but I'm smiling the whole way because I so enjoyed doing this with you, Meg Shoup, and you, Mike McClure. Let me start with you, Meg. How's it going? How was week 1?
Week 1 was great. I had it was more profitable in the sports betting space, but it was still, slightly profitable in DFS, and it was a great week overall, and it's just so fun to have football back, so I am happy.
Mike, you pinpointed that Washington Commanders Tampa game with Baker and Jaden Daniels. How did it end up turning out for you?
It ended up being a really good week for me, Sia. I had 3 quarterbacks across all the lineups. It was Baker Mayfield, Jaden Daniels, and Sam Darnold. So I really did great there. I will say I had a lot of Terry McLaurin still, which didn't come out, or otherwise we'd have been looking at really big scores there, but I had a ton of Chris Godwin. I got there late with Ken Walker. I got to admit, at halftime, I was not feeling all of my Ken Walker exposure, which was nearly 100%, but he did get there late, so I was delighted to see that. Alvin Kamara got there as well. So, yeah, it ultimately ended up being a great week, despite some nerves, I would say about 2:33 p.m.
Yeah, fair enough. 2:33 p.m. That was 2:30 to 3 o'clock p.m., not precisely 2:33, which would have been funny if you were pinpointing that time. All right, we got a big slate here. And by the way, everybody in the chat, Nicholas, I see you, Nick, Luke, thank you for all the compliments about this show. I actually really appreciate that. Hit the like button if you could. And if you haven't already reviewed this show, go on Spotify, go on Apple Podcasts and review this show as well. We welcome everyone in. Hi, Lori and Nick and Brent, Jeffrey, Josh. Thanks for being in here. Let's get it started because we got 13 games. Only 3 4 o'clock games, which I think is just interesting. So 10 1 o'clock games, it makes the afternoon slate not that great, but it's still very playable. I will mention, Meg, because I know you're going to love this. We had a bunch of people tweeting at me or sending me messages saying, hey, this afternoon slate thing, I really like it. And they were very profitable doing that. So that's got to be music to your ears.
Absolutely. And the afternoon slate was super profitable to me because just like we talked about last week and Mike said, high on that Bucs game. So I stacked up that Bucs game and it was a really good afternoon slate. Actually, that really helped me. So I'd love to hear that the listeners felt that way too. And let's run it back.
Let's run it back. Let's get it started with game 1 here. We're going Saints, Cowboys. It's a pretty high total here, 45.5. I think it's ticked up a little bit, maybe to 46.5 in some places. The Saints are 6-point dogs walking into Dallas. Saints looked good last week, but they played an SEC team led by Bryce Young. So I'm not 100% sure we know what to expect from the Saints. And I would say the same about the Cowboys playing Deshaun Watson. That defense is great, but that was just a really choppy game. I don't know how good the Cowboys are. Meg, let's talk from a DFS standpoint, though. I'll start with you. There's so many good games on this slate, and there's so many value players. Like I noticed Josh Lucero saying, I love this slate, let's get it. And I think there's some players really to love in cash and in tournaments. Is there anybody you love in this game, though?
Yeah, you made a great point about these teams and their games, and especially New Orleans shocked me last week. But, from a DFS perspective for week 2, while they both performed very well last week, I just see other spots I want to get to. So I don't personally see myself getting or focusing on this game.
Mike, we have Alvin Kamara at 7K. I know you were on him last week. I'm guessing you're not on him this week. There's really nobody that I'm looking at. I think Chris Olave could be an interesting contrarian play on most slates, but against this Dallas D, not so sure. Rashid Shaheed, he's a name and he's only 4,600, maybe a value contrarian pivot off some value plays that we'll talk about later in the show. With all of that said, and I will say this, I don't think Jake Ferguson is playing. I mean, maybe you go back up tight end here. That makes a lot of sense with Schoonmaker. Any thoughts here in this game?
Yeah, I think the Saints are interesting overall. We got to talk about them quickly. Just anytime you get offensive coordinating changes in the league, it's fascinating. But one thing that you're probably going to see a lot of analysts talk more about is just pre-snap motion. I think it's the next thing we're going to talk just a ton about, right? But I think it's warranted because you look at the NFL standings, the teams with the lowest pre-snap motion were the worst teams in the NFL. It's the correlation is nearly perfect in terms of win and loss. So what was fascinating, Clint Kubiak, the new offensive coordinator for the Saints, their play action and pre-snap motion skyrocketed in week 1. Now, some of that is certainly a product of the opponent that they were playing. They got to try a lot of things. They were in very favorable positions. But pre-snap motion is going to be amazing for Chris Olave. Chris Olave getting to move around the field. He's clearly the most talented player on that roster, in my opinion. Alvin Kamara Kamara was. He's just father time gets us all, right? So I personally love Chris Olave in this matchup, and I love him going forward because we talk about Olave, we talk about Garrett Wilson with the Jets, and we're going to talk. I'm blanking on the Falcons guy, but Drake London. We talk about those three a lot because we expect big things from those three players. I think this is a great situation for Olave because I don't think the team's going to be great, but I think they're going to be good enough to push in a lot of situations. So we're going to be talking about the Saints team when they're basically trailing by one score most of the game in these kind of games. So I love Chris Olave here. I would even go as far as to say he is still cash game viable, which might be a stretch to a lot of people to hear that, but he's definitely in the player pool.
From an ownership standpoint, though, Mike, he's certainly a GPP option, right? Because people aren't, with all the value on the board, which we'll talk about later in the show, people aren't going to be paying the $6,400 for Olave, correct?
Yes. I think that I'm showing him about 2% owned right now in tournaments. I think that we might steam that up to 4 or 5, but there's 0% chance he's 10% owned.
Yeah, I like that. And Rashid Shaheed, any thoughts on him? Is that a pass because there's so much other value?
For me, it is. Yeah, it's a pass because there's other value, and you're still like Olave is someone you can get there on volume, and when he gets in the end zone, you're going to really, really have a nice score. Shaheed is going to be you've got to score a touchdown on a 50-yard bomb. So for me, he's way better served as betting either an anytime touchdown or a longest reception over prop.
Justin is asking how much is Derek Carr? 5,300. I think we might have had it on the screen if you want to look at that, although I know we're looking at wide receivers now. And I only say that for those of you that are listening to the podcast, just know that when we go game by game, Nada usually pulls up the screen so we can see some of these prices for some of the players that we're actually talking about. But yeah, Derek Carr, 5,300. Mike, last question on this, because we do have to move on to Bucs Lions, which is just a great game. I'm sure Meg she's nodding her head. Yes. Derek Carr stack, like we're just playing Olave isolated, right? We're not playing him with the stack. I mean, 5,300 is a nice price.
Yeah, let me look. Yeah, it looks like Olave mostly, although I do have a full-on Saints onslaught that simulates very well, and that is Carr, Kamara, Olave, and Rashid.
Wow.
Shaheed. So Kamara is still playable to me. I think that we should see him still catch a lot of passes out of the backfield here. I don't know about the run game efficiency, but based off of I know we're going a lot on this game, but I do think it's important because Dallas surprised me last week against Cleveland. Yeah. They put the most pressures on a quarterback by a mile, almost double the next best team in week 1. That should translate to a ton of short area catches for Alvin Kamara.
Very interesting. All right. Keep that in mind in the prop market. We always tell you on FFT DFS that we don't just talk DFS. A lot of this translates over to the prop market. Maybe you want to look at Kamara receptions, Kamara receiving yards, and we'll talk against the spread here a little bit as well with some of these games I'm particularly interested in betting. Let's move on to Buccaneers Lions, 51.5 point total. Lions, about a 7.5 point favorite here at home. Really good situation for Jared Goff. This Tampa Bay secondary a little banged up as well. Meg, I'm going to start with you. Listen, we all cashed in. Well, at least you two cashed in on Baker Mayfield last week. Jared Goff in a really good spot here at home. I do think it might be a little bit of a bounce back for Amon-Ra St. Brown, who people aren't going to want to play because of some of the other receivers they want to play, but also because he just had a dud in week 1. But there's so much on this board. What do you like?
Yeah, I absolutely love this game. So I'm circling this game as probably my favorite. And that's because what I realized in week 1 or was reminded in week 1 is we do need that pushback, right? The Giants, Vikings was the perfect example. There was no pushback from the Giants. So we need that pushback. Luckily, the Bucs stacks were still able to get there, even with a lack of pushback from Washington's offense last week. That's just a reminder that I'm really targeting games this week that are going to have that back and forth firepower, and no game does it better to me than this one. I believe it's one of the highest totals on the slate, and I was lucky enough last January to talk about this very game in the playoffs with you guys, and it delivered in the playoffs. It was 31-23 in the Dome. A lot of the guys got there, and I think it can do so again. These are two offenses that these are two defenses that we don't want to target the running game against them. It still is somewhat of a pass funnel for both. So we want to target these passing games, and that can spell a shootout. And so I love both passing games. I like the Bucs passing game better because we know inside the red zone, Detroit can get a bit run heavy. We saw both running backs from the Lions get there last week. That can happen even if Amon-Ra has a good game statistically, or Jamison Williams, who I love, has a good game statistically. As far as the end zone touches, it still could be the running back. So that's my way of saying I love the Bucs stack the most as far as quarterback receivers, but I love bringing it back with Amon-Ra and or Jameson Williams.
Mike, what's your call here? I think there's so many interesting plays with some heavy hitter plays, but a guy I think, Meg, you might have brought up last week was, or maybe it was one of our shows in the offseason series, Jalen McMillan at 3,600. Listen, I mean, he could have really cashed in. I mean, I believe if memory serves, he caught a touchdown. He was one of those 37 points that Tampa put up, but he probably should have caught a couple touchdowns. I mean, Trey Palmer's in there, but it looks like Jalen's the third receiver. Mike, a lot of value in a lot of just big time players that have high prices, but big time nonetheless. Jameson Williams, we haven't even mentioned at 5,300. What do you like in this one?
Yeah, this one is going to be interesting because, Tampa, they look great offensively. I still personally believe it was more of a product of the Commanders defense in that week one game. Just looking at individual defensive grades, they graded out as the worst defense by a mile in week one. In fact, they had the lowest individual grade out of any team in the last 3 years in any game. For me, again, my grading is different than some of the other metrics that you guys might use, but it was not a good situation for the Commanders D. So I do think that Tampa still is a solid team. They're right there. I think they should be a favorite to win that division along with New Orleans. I don't think Atlanta's any good at all. Now, when I look at this matchup, though, Amon-Ra St. Brown stands out immediately. This projects as a way better spot for him. Jameson Williams, he's probably still too cheap at 5,300 for the upside he possesses, but I would only play Jameson Williams when it's going to be a stack. Obviously with his quarterback, Amon-Ra is the guy that I think you can get to without stacking quarterback situation, just sheerly on volume. I think for a couple reasons. Number one, schematically against the Bucs, I think it's going to really be a good game for him. And then I also think they're going to pepper him with targets early just because of how quiet he was in week one. So the rest of the game, I'm actually not super attached to it other than Chris Godwin has to be a consideration at the price point. Again, we know Mike Evans is the touchdown monster, the deep threat. I'm personally looking at a game where I think that Tampa could be in a one-score game, a competitive game, and that's where Godwin's going to have to own the middle of the field if they're going to have success. So I like Godwin again. He definitely rates near the top.
Yeah, this one's really interesting because there's a lot of good games we can play. Mike, let me bounce this off you. If we want to maybe, I don't know, this is a double leverage situation here, but what if the Lions, what if what you were saying about the Commanders is true and the Tampa success was just predicated on like the worst defense in the league? Is this a game where maybe you just go in on David Montgomery and you get out and you load up on another game? Is that, from a GPP standpoint, is that a potential play?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a potential play in tournaments. Definitely not going to recommend it in your cash games by any means, but in tournaments, yes. I think that we'll talk about it a lot this season, but anytime, in a game looks like a good stackable game, just like we thought Washington and Tampa were last week, anytime you want to take a contrarian stance and essentially just play the running back and get out, I think is solid because being honest with you, last week, I know Jaden Daniels got the rushing touchdowns and got home because he had all the yardage and made me look good. There's a scenario there where Brian Robinson gets the 3 rushing touchdowns at the goal line. And ultimately you're not winning tournaments without him. So you can see how it could work. And I think that's a similar situation on the Lions side this week.
Very interesting. All right, let's go to go ahead, Meg.
Can I just say one more thing about this game? Because I am obsessed about this game and love especially again, like the passing side. I will say in the 1 p.m. window or the early only slate, I would like onslaughting this game. Again, if you're looking for that back and forth potential shootout, these are 2 good teams, 2 good offenses that, I don't think we can say the same for some of their games like Washington and New York. So these are 2 good teams and 2 pass defenses we want to target. So I love a onslaught of this game in the early only.
Well, Meg, Washington, New York might be an interesting DFS opportunity. We'll have to get to that. By the way, everybody rewind to when Mike McClure was trashing the Commanders, rightfully so. Look at my face and Meg's face for like that 15-second period. It was just a look of just kind of shame and embarrassment, and that's just where we're at. But it's only week 1, and I love Jaden Daniels, so let's see what happens. I also love
Jaden Daniels, to be clear. I thought he was the best rookie quarterback by a significant margin.
Well, I mean, fair, but that's also not saying much because Caleb Williams looked awful and Bo Nix looked pretty much just as bad. So fair enough, though. I like Jaden Daniels. I think he's going to have a great career. I think he's the best rookie in this class. I've said that over and over again, and I plan to be. I think I'm going to be right about that. Let's talk about another young quarterback in his second year, Anthony Richardson. I think this one's really interesting. Meg, I'll start with you. It might not be interesting from a DFS standpoint, although I'm still going to be willing to play Anthony Richardson because I just think his ability to explode, and I don't have to stack him with any. Last week I stacked him with Michael Pittman. I also played him alone, and frankly, I think I want to play him alone in this game as well. I think Adonai Mitchell is really interesting at 4,000. Probably should have had a couple touchdowns against the Texans last week. I don't know if Josh Downs is officially declared out. He might be playing in this one, so that might be a downgrade for Pierce and Adonai Mitchell. But with all that said, any interest in this game whatsoever?
Not really, given the Packers situation, and again looking for these potential pushback situations. I do think Richardson is always in play, like you said, because of his just absolute ceiling capability. Definitely don't feel like you have to stack him. I mean, he had 9 completions last week. One was that beautiful bomb to Alec Pierce. That was amazing. But, it is pretty volatile from the passing side. So as we saw last week with Jaden Daniels, Josh Allen, and Anthony Richardson, don't feel like you have to force these stacks with these rushing quarterbacks. So interest in Anthony Richardson, I'm probably going to get other places again because I'm looking for some pushback and I don't see it happening from the Packers.
Mike, your thoughts here. First of all, I want to mention this line opened at 3.5. It went down to 3. It's now 2.5 in some places. And I'll just tell you right now, I'm taking the bait. And I already put this out on Sportsline on Monday. I like the Colts in this one. I'm certainly going to hit it at 2.5. I want your comments on that. Am I just kind of buying into a trap here? I think the Malik Willis plan was for him to get to know the playbook over a period of months, not a period of 19 days. So, I mean, I think this is a really tough spot for Malik Willis. I have no DFS interest in him. I don't really have any DFS interest in the pass catchers. What do you like on either side here?
I actually love Josh Jacobs here. I do like, I could be very wrong here, but I wouldn't be shocked if the Packers win this game outright still, personally. The only reason I think they're going to have a ton of success, we're not going to ask, they're not going to ask Willis to throw the football deep down the field, but Josh Jacobs is going to come in and he's going to try to do exactly what Joe Mixon did to this defense last week. And that is 30 touches of the football. I honestly, you see 16 carries in the last game. That was when they had a healthy quarterback. You realize Jordan Love got hurt on essentially the last play of the game, right? So I still think that Jacobs is going to touch the ball a ton, but I also think they're going to get creative. I think they're going to find ways to put the football in Jaden Reed's hands, which I think is going to be a great thing for them. So I honestly, it's a gross click, but in super contests, things like that, I've already played the Packers side in the betting contest with the spread. But Josh Jacobs should be $8,000 in this situation. He shouldn't be $8,000 when Jordan Love's healthy and when they're playing their full passing offense. But in this situation, he's $6,500. Josh Jacobs is going to have the most touches out of any running back this week.
Yeah, I agree with the volume part. So that does make sense. I will say this, comparing Jacobs to Mixon is tough only because there was the fear that CJ Stroud was going to tear them up. And they don't, obviously the Colts secondary is bad, but they don't have that fear. So I think we're going to see a lot of stacked boxes to contain Malik Willis's running ability, but also Josh Jacobs. So I think Jacobs is going to be relatively inefficient, but that doesn't mean he's not going to get there with the volume. So I do like that play. Let's move on. You said gross, I think, Mike. Let's go to this next game. It's Chargers at the Panthers. I mean, we don't have to spend a lot of time on this. Chargers -6. This line is kind of moving around a little bit. It's still 6 right now. I expect this to click back up to 6.5, if not 7. 39-point total. I think a lot of people were in on Chuba Hubbard last week. That didn't work out. The receivers on this team, no interest whatsoever. Mike, I'll start with you this time. I think we're going to go real fast here. J.K. Dobbins, probably the only player of interest at 5,400. Do you like anybody else? And do you like J.K. Dobbins?
Dobbins is fine. He's not going to crack my top 3 there, but totally fine. I also think that, it's still going to be a timeshare in that backfield for me going forward. I think Lab McConkey is the piece to talk about, though. I think he's going to clearly be the number 1 wide receiver in this offense and going to be an absolute target monster. So I think that if they ever get in a situation where they're behind or truly pushed, we're talking 10 plus targets every single week, no matter what. So the $4,900 price tag, he should be $6K like Chris Godwin. essentially. So for me, I have some interest in playing him here. I know you don't love seeing 7 targets, only 39 yards. That's a product of how they're going to use him, no doubt. But I do think Ladd McConkey is drastically underpriced, so I will be playing some.
Meg, any interest in this game?
I'm smiling a lot because Ladd McConkey was one of my biggest stands in best ball season. So like that, and hope that carries on all season long. And I think, when Chargers play the Chiefs, my goodness, that's going to be very exciting. In this game, obviously, we look to lean on the running game more likely. So I do have interest in Dobbins. I will say, if you want to get incredibly contrarian, look what Derek Carr did to this Panthers defense last week. So if you want to get incredibly contrarian, and I would probably likely do this more on like the early only slate, maybe do a Herbert, Ladd, McConkey, and then you could get chalky everywhere else, something along those lines. But in the main slate, I likely wouldn't do that. And just looking at Dobbins.
No, that's an interesting take there because, I don't think anybody expected Derek Carr to put up, and it was easy. Like, it looked like he was just like playing catch with his friends. Like it was, that's why I classified the Panthers as an SEC team. Obviously, they could bounce back as well. But let's go to another team that needs to bounce back, the Jets at the Titans. This is one where I think we're going to kind of go through pretty quickly as well. Meg, I'll start with you. Breece Hall is interesting at 7,400. I'm personally not going to get there with him, because I just there's so much other value that I like. Although, I mean, the volume, we talked about Josh Jacobs' volume. I expect Breece Hall's to be in that category as well. I'm not interested on either side of the ball. Is there anybody I'm missing here?
I will point out, I am not probably going to get to Breece Hall for the reasons you just mentioned. I just simply like other running backs better at various price points. But as we saw, even in a very bad offensive performance, the offense runs through Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson. So I will say, from a volume perspective and likely a bounce back perspective this week, I do like Breece Hall and I do like Garrett Wilson this week. So I like him. I likely will get to more of Garrett Wilson than Breece Hall. And then again, if you want to be contrarian, I'm seeing him coming in likely at very low ownership. Calvin Ridley should run more in that slot role. Again, more manufactured touches, hopefully. That I think that could be an option, even if you wanted to do like a skinny Garrett Wilson, Calvin Ridley. I think that's interesting. Obviously, Will Levis's first performance, that was another big stand of mine, was awful. But hopefully they can, have a little more pushback, a little more life in the passing game this week. So I don't mind Tony Pollard either. He got more of the workload. But again, I'd say the two that I would be most likely to play is Garrett Wilson and Calvin Ridley at likely low ownership.
All right, Mike, any interest in this one?
Yeah, I'm going to have a ton of Breece Hall, probably every lineup. Love Breece in this matchup. Look, Breece Hall was phenomenal against the 49ers. I know he lost a fumble, a heck of a defensive play. But when you look at the rushing in the game, the offensive line wasn't great, but it was really the 49ers defense. So Breece Hall had 54 rushing yards in that game. 57 of them came with contact in the backfield. And what I mean, his average touch was getting contacted in the backfield, yet he didn't have a single rush for a loss in that game. Just absolutely incredible stuff from him, but it's really the passing game. I think he's going to continue to be heavily involved in the passing game. Had that game been slightly more competitive, they would have had a lot more options to throw to Breece. The 49ers did a really good job at the end of the first half, keeping Rodgers off the field for the final 7 minutes, essentially. That was something that hurt him. Tennessee has no ability to do that. Absolutely zero. So I think the volume is going to be very high. I think that Breece Hall touches the football 25 times total. So I love Breece Hall in this matchup, and also consider we should see some weather in this game. We're talking 6 to 7 inches of rain over the next 2.5 days in Nashville with the hurricane coming up from the coast. So this game will likely be wet and one that Breece Hall touches the ball a lot.
Meteorologist Mike McClure actually reporting from Nashville. I absolutely love to see that. And you're right about the Breece Hall volume. So, I mean, maybe you just changed my mind, because out of the backfield, he is going to get some receptions. We know Aaron Rodgers still trying to protect that Achilles a little bit. I think he is going to get the ball out fast. By the way, our week 2 DFS contest, if you're watching us live, we actually put the link for it in the chat. It's only $5. There's 200 people in it. But if you're listening to the podcast, check out the podcast description. The link for it is in there, and it's in the YouTube description if you're watching us after the fact. We got so many more great games to get to, and we're going to do it right after this message from our partners.
A Quiet Place Day 1 is now streaming on Paramount+. It's thrilling, terrifying. It will make your heart pound out of your chest.
We are back on, I was about to say the early edge. You watched us on the early edge earlier today. We are back on Fantasy Football Today DFS. It's Meg Shoup at Megs08 DFS. Give her a follow. And of course, Mike McClure at Mike5754. All right, let's get to the next game. We got a lot to run through. So we're going to go quickly through some of these games that frankly don't have a ton of DFS value in our opinion. And maybe it's one of these games too. The Raiders at the Ravens. It's a 41.5 point total. Ravens big favorites here. So you might not have that back and forth that we alluded to earlier in some of these other games. Lamar Jackson is 7,700. Derrick Henry, 6,700. I don't, on the Raiders side, I'm not really interested in Devontae Adams at 7,300. Brock Bowers at 4,400 is interesting. Obviously, Isaiah Likely playing this game with Mark Andrews. Meg, any interest whatsoever?
I actually do have a slight amount of interest in this game, but just on really two players. One, to be contrarian from the Ravens side, I'm seeing very low ownership on good old big dog Derrick Henry. He's going to be probably very game script dependent this season, and obviously no better game script for him here as big home favorite. So I like him, for potentially 2 touchdowns, over 100 yards. And to me, if you're getting him at, sub 6% ownership for that kind of stat line, I'm very interested in that. So Derrick Henry, and then Brock Bowers, a great week 1 performance and usage. So I do have some interest at that price point for Brock Bowers if he's going to get that kind of usage in a likely, obviously very negative game script.
Yeah, you said likely a negative game script.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Isaiah Likely, Mike, because I don't know that I'm expecting anything close to what we got last week, but I could be wrong about that. He's 4,800. Interestingly, Mark Andrews only 200 more than him. We got Zay Flowers. I mentioned some of the players. Are you in on anybody in this game?
I'm going to not be in on Likely here. Likely someone I love in a competitive game. That's where he's really going to stand out. But here, I think they actually use Mark Andrews a little more. But the only thing I can get to is going to be Derrick Henry, and that would be as a stack with the Ravens DST. I would play that correlation and move on, essentially. Otherwise, I'm going to be off the game.
Okay. I do want to remind everybody, because we got some comments last week that, hey, great cheat sheet, everybody. But I want to get Mike's top 3 at each position. Well, we're bringing that back. We only didn't have it for week 1, which was actually my fault. But we're going to have cheat sheets for me and Meg Shoup. But Mike every week is going to bring his top 3 at each position once we get through the game-by-game breakdown. So please look forward to that. And if you haven't already hit the like button, if you haven't already subscribed to this channel, because, of course, we're on the Fantasy Football Today channel, so you're probably already subscribed because you watch that dream team every single day. But if you're not already subscribed, check that out. And don't forget to rate this podcast, Fantasy Football Today DFS. That's what you type in if you're not already subscribed. Give us a 5-star review if you could. Maybe a couple of nice comments. Maybe not for me, but maybe for Meg and Mike. Let's go to Seattle and New England. Another low total, 38.5 points. It's a 3.5 point. I should say the Seahawks are favored by 3.5 points here on the road. Patriots pull off the week 1 win. Can't imagine there's a ton to like here. Mike, I start with you. Anything you like in this one?
It'll be a pass for me. Ramondre Stevenson was phenomenal in week 1. We'll see if they're able to do it again. Keeping in mind, almost all of his yardage was after contact. I expect Seattle to be one of the better defenses and get better every week going forward. So I'm off this one completely. Ken Walker, someone I love, have a ton in best ball. Not encouraged with the injury concern already. I'm going to be. I think that they split the backfield up pretty evenly this week. I think Charbonnet is going to get more looks. So I'm off this completely.
Yeah, and what's interesting, Meg, is it's not like we're even getting great value on Charbonnet as he's priced at 5,800. So, and the receiving core, I liked JSN last week, but guess what? Tyler Lockett wasn't as banged up as I thought. So the distribution, I don't know where to go with it. I mean, I will say DK Metcalf at 5,900, that's a super low price on a guy that could grab 2 touchdowns and 100 yards, but still, I don't know that I get there. Do you get there on any Seattle or New England guys?
Yeah, I think you guys both said it perfectly. I was so impressed with Ramondre last week. DK's price is low, but there's too many other things I like on this slate, so not going to get here.
Okay, let's move on. If you have questions about any of these games, we try to keep the pace pretty fast, but if you have questions, let us know, especially DFS oriented questions, and we will try to get to them. Meg, I got to start with you with this next one. It's the Giants. It's the Commanders. I really don't know who's going to win this game. I really hope, listen, if Washington, spoiler alert, I'm a Washington fan. So is Meg. I think I mentioned that earlier. But if they don't win this game, it's going to be a pretty bad season for Washington. Of course, JD can progress throughout the season, can turn things around. But this is a 44-point total. I think it opened in that 41 range and has really been bet up to 44. I do think it bodes well for these quarterbacks, particularly Meg, Daniel Jones, because of this secondary. But both defenses bad. There's a lot of names to potentially like here. Do you like any of them?
Yes, and I just want to first say, last week we talked about targeting these defenses because they're so bad. Mike talked about how historically bad Washington's defense is. So we were right to target them. Last week, luckily, the Bucs did get there in it without really any pushback. So it's a weird situation of two bad defenses, but also two bad offenses, truly. I mean, Jaden Daniels is exciting from a fantasy perspective, but make no mistake, this is a bad offense. It lacks weapons and has a terrible play caller. And I'm letting out my anger. This is like therapy. Mike said it perfectly about the pre-snap motion.
Yes.
Good play callers do use pre-snap motion. The top teams in the league do it. I'm now so upset and regretting our hire of Cliff Kingsbury and wish it was the guy, and his name is escaping me right now, that went to New Orleans. So letting out all that, we do not use much pre-snap motion. We do not get the ball in our best player's hands. My favorite player, Terry McLaurin. So for all those reasons, I'm so frustrated, and it's hard to play any pass catcher from Washington with confidence, knowing, I don't know, even against the Giants, are they going to be able to get Terry the ball? I'd like to think so, but maybe you're better off if you're playing Jaden Daniels, which obviously he is a target in this game against the Giants, and of course with his rushing upside. So like Jaden Daniels, who do you stack him with? I don't know. I don't know that you can pay up for Terry because I don't trust Cliff Kingsbury to get him the ball. Maybe you pay down like a Luke McCaffrey or Zach Ertz, or just play him naked, as we've talked about. On the other side, we're targeting the historically bad Washington secondary, but can Daniel Jones do it? I like Neighbors. Maybe you just play Neighbors. I don't know. Maybe Daniel Jones, he's feeling the heat. Maybe he does come and have like a Kirk Cousins. You like that game. I don't know. Again, I have no idea what to do with this game, Sia, other than we know both defenses are bad, but can we really trust the offenses? So I think what it'll ultimately be is maybe Jaden Daniels naked with like a Neighbors run back for me, but it's a frustrating situation to get to.
That is an interesting choice there. I mean, I actually can co-sign most of what you just said. Jaden Daniels naked with a Malik Neighbors run back. I don't hate that at all. Mike, I know a lot of people, including Jeffrey Lightsey and myself, are interested in Daniel Jones to Malik Neighbors. It's a cost-efficient stack. And, I love how Meg just couched the Daniel Jones experience for week 2, because if he was ever going to have a you like that Kirk Cousins game, it's this game. And if it doesn't happen here, it's probably not going to happen. Beatable secondary. Daniel Jones only 5,300. Any interest on the Daniel Jones side or the Jaden Daniels side?
Both sides. Love this game. This is the same game as the Bucs game last week. I know it sounds insane to say, but Malik Neighbors, by far core play for me. Cash games, tournaments, easily one of the top values. Minnesota's a good defense, and he had a great first game there despite how everything went. Daniel Jones, believe it or not, again, that's why we grade things out. He didn't grade out as poorly as you think. In week 1, he had 5 dropped passes from his receivers in that game that drastically changed things a bit. So I do think they're going to run all over him, meaning hitting Malik Neighbors in the passing game. Daniel Jones, he still has a little rushing upside. He's going to have some success there. So I like both sides. I like Daniel Jones to Malik Neighbors. I like Jaden Daniels naked with Malik Neighbors. Those two will be there. Malik Neighbors by far the top play. But my other favorite play for large field tournaments is going to be Brian Robinson at running back. I'm going to be playing him. I think he's an excellent pivot from Jordan Mason in tournaments if McCaffrey does not go, which I do not think McCaffrey goes personally. If he does, be an extremely limited package from him. You look at Robinson here. Look, Jaden Daniels had 2 rushing touchdowns in this game. One of them went to Robinson, who was down a half yard from the goal line. Could have reviewed the play, could have actually been a touchdown for him, but they didn't. Daniels ran it in the next snap. So he's still getting those looks. He's going to be involved in the passing game here. So I do love Robinson. I think there's also a scenario where you could play Robinson, Daniels together in this particular matchup. So with Malik Neighbors as the bring back on the other side.
Yeah, I thought about the Robinson Daniels package there because I don't know what to expect from McLaurin. I do think 5,700 is actually a decent price for him, just like last week where he was in that, I believe, upper 5K range.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have a lot of interest in this game as well. I don't think I'm going to get to Brian Robinson, but I absolutely understand the argument. It wouldn't surprise me if Austin Eckler got a few more looks, a few more potential targets, or just being on the field for a few more snaps, because I thought he looked pretty good last week. And I know he's a big locker room guy on that team as well, probably has earned a few more snaps as well. All right, let's go to Cleveland and Jacksonville, 41.5 point total. By the way, some of these names you're going to hear again because we're going to do our cheat sheet and Mike's top 3 at each position. So again, stay tuned for that. Browns, Jags. Browns are a 3-point dog in Jacksonville. It's a 41.5 point total, pretty low. Implied totals pretty low, as you might expect. Meg, I don't have much interest in this game. I'll just kind of keep it at that. What do you like?
Same. I'll just keep it simple. I mean, this is the, bottom 2 worst quarterback, Daniel Jones. And then we talk about Deshaun Watson. He's awful. I'm not going to touch any part of his offense. And then I'm not really interested in the Jaguars side when, again, there's so many other more attractive pieces on the slate. So I'm out for this game as well.
Mike, there's some names here that I like, but not in this particular setup. Or is this a pass?
It's mostly a pass. The only thing I'm going to play here is going to be Jordan Akins, the tight end for the Cleveland Browns, with David Njoku ruled out. He saw 4 targets last week, caught 3 of them. I think it's going to be a similar game plan there, so I think he will be involved. As far as Jacksonville, yeah, I mean, look, Jacksonville, you could play Travis Etienne and win a GPP. He could score 3 touchdowns pretty easily. Brian Thomas is going to be phenomenal as well. But the problem I've got with Jacksonville, based on the way they played that last game, we need a little more data in terms of usage because they've still got a number of capable guys out there. Gabe Davis ate into Evan Ingram way more than I think some of us thought would happen. So it's just the usage there. If you've got a confident stance on one of these situations, then I personally think it's fine to, spend up for ETN and really, hope that he lands in the end zone, because he should have scored multiple touchdowns in the last game. He fumbled at the half-yard line going into the end zone, became a touchback. I will say they had no business losing that game. The Dolphins had no business winning that game. But for me, it's Akins. Tight end's kind of a wasteland. I think he's an excellent punt here in this spot.
It's interesting you bring up that game because if anybody was watching, I'm sure everybody was watching the early edge. They know that Mike likes the Bills against the Dolphins tonight. There should be a documentary on how Jacksonville and Tennessee lost their week 1 games. It was truly, like, to me, unbelievable how you, and I understand it's week 1, these things happen, it's football, but wow. I mean, Miami had no business winning that game, and I really don't think the Bears had any business beating Tennessee. All right, we got a lot more games to cover, including some high-flying teams like the 49ers, the Bengals. Let's see, the Chiefs, that Cardinals-Rams game, which I know has a lot of people's interest. We're going to do it right after this message from our partners.
Football action continues. Are you ready for this? Ready to take chances? As the gridiron is taken over by the Great White North. It's time to storm the fortress. It's time to fight on the battlefield. Catch the Canadian Football League on CBS Sports Network.
We are back on Fantasy Football Today, DFS. Let's move along to, I believe, the last 1 o'clock game. We're going to talk about 49ers at the Vikings. This is a reasonably high total, 45.5. 49ers favored by 6, walking into Minnesota. Mike, I'm going to start with you here because there's a term that a lot of the industry uses, including ourselves, particularly in football, and it's free square. Is Jordan Mason a free square this week?
Yeah, if McCaffrey is out, he is a free square in cash games. In tournaments, you're still going to want some exposure there for sure. But I do think there's a scenario where you could get away in a tournament with not having him. But that's going to require, finding other running backs that land in the end zone twice. But I do think there are a number of them that will. So, if McCaffrey is out, it is a good underrated defense in Minnesota. But Mason would be a free square. Probably should be 6,500 minimum.
Yeah. Meg, do you agree? Is Jordan Mason somebody you're just going to put in pretty much all your lineups, or at least most of them?
I agree with Mike completely. Yes, a free square, but in tournaments, I won't play him 100% because you can get creative and do some contrarian pivot. So yes, I will have him in tournaments, but I will also do some lineups with a contrarian pivot.
Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think the thing that's interesting here with Mason, if he is the lock, like if CMC is out like we think, what it's going to do is it's likely going to change overall lineup construction on DraftKings. And what I mean by that is you're extremely likely to see 3 running back lineups now. You're going to see, just because of Josh Jacobs, Breece Hall, some of the other options, you're very likely to see running backs used in flex more. So in some of the tournaments, it could be an interesting spot to grab an extra high-end wide receiver here.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Alter your construction knowing that you're playing some of the chalk. Mike, is there anybody else in this game that you're interested in? I mean, again, the total's reasonably high. It's not one of the higher ones, but 45.5 it's not nothing. Sam Darnold had a great week last week. He's only 5,200, but again, this is the San Francisco defense now. And Justin Jefferson, 8,300. We got Brandon Ayuk, who probably should have had a better game at 6,500. Debo, 6,800. Anybody else you like?
I think Justin Jefferson still warrants the conversation. He's still elite. We know that Darnold is competent, but I do think that it's obviously a massive step up in class defensively. So I could definitely see scenarios where they're trailing enough that Jefferson kind of gets one of those scenarios where he's going to have that late game 6-7 targets, an extra 50 yards for free. So I do like Jefferson a bit here.
All right, Meg, anybody else you're interested in besides Jordan Mason?
I think that makes sense especially from a likely negative game strip volume perspective. I also think Deebo Samuel, especially if you aren't playing Mason, you could play the angle that Deebo Samuel gets, a rushing steals a rushing touchdown or 2. So I like Deebo Samuel definitely in this game, especially in lineups that you don't play Mason.
Yeah, Deebo. That's such a good point. I think Debo makes a lot of sense, especially in the non-Jordan Mason lineups. All right, let's move to a game that people definitely want to talk about. This is probably going to be a top 2, top 3 game that people are going to have investments in. It's the Rams at Arizona. This is probably my favorite game. There's so many pieces. There's so much value here. Mike, I'm going to start with you. I like Kyler. I like Stafford. Kyren Williams is one of those running backs. You're talking about 3 running back lineups where I expect him to be sort of in that Breece Hall, Jordan Mason mix. I mean, you could go down to Colby Parkinson at value, Trey McBride bounce back, Marvin Harrison bounce back. Then, of course, Cooper Kupp, Demarcus Robinson, Tyler Johnson. It's endless. I could talk for 5 minutes, but you talk now.
Yeah, I like the game a lot. I really like the Rams side. It's hard not to, because you already knew Cooper Kupp was going to get his. With Puka Nacua being out, the offense, the tree is just extremely concentrated, in my opinion. I think a big benefactor is going to be Kyren Williams. I think Kyren Williams sees extra touches, both on the ground and in the passing game. What was really encouraging there for me personally was just the fact that it was Ronnie Rivers and not Blake Corum coming in. So I think it's heavy dose of Kyren here. Love Cooper Kupp. He's just underpriced. I'm not going to say like absolute free square like some of the other situations, but this is a spot where when we know Cooper Kupp's healthy, he should be $9,000 in this matchup. In this matchup with this usage, like it's close to a free square. So for that reason, I love Stafford. I'm going to be playing a ton of Stafford, and you'll see here in a minute when we talk about position by position. And then Tyler Johnson's the guy I want for the other value spot, 3,300. I personally, it's very small sample size. He was extremely talented in Tampa Bay at times, to the point where Tom Brady lobbied for having him on the roster at times. So I do believe that he's going to be involved again and have a very similar workload to what we just saw.
I feel like Tyler Johnson's issue was a playbook issue and just not being on the same page with Brady on some of those, on some of his routes. But the talent is certainly there, and he looks to have fit in really nicely in Sean McVay's offense. Meg, I mean, again, there's so much. I really like the Kyler Murray side. So, I mean, I get the Stafford side, of course, but I could play Kyler Murray with nobody, or with Trey McBride, but I kind of like the nobody thing because he spreads it around a lot to Wilson and Dortch and obviously Trey McBride, Marvin Harrison. And then you bring it back with a couple of Rams guys like Kyren and maybe a Tyler Johnson. How do you want to play this game?
I'm so glad you said that, because that's exactly what I was going to say. I don't think I'm going to force a stack with Kyler, just because I don't likely think I'm going to pay up at tight end, and McBride is $6K, and then I don't know that I'm ready to go to Harrison after week 1. I know he could easily bounce back, but I don't know that I'm ready to do that. I just like going Kyler and then bringing it back with Kupp and one of the cheap for pass catchers. Love the Tyler Johnson. You could do Tyler Johnson. You could do Colby Parkinson. You could do Demarcus Robinson. So choose your pass catcher with Cup. But I think you can even bring back 2 in this likely, very high scoring, hopefully as we talked about, back and forth game. So that's how I want to play it. So you said it perfectly.
Yeah, looking at props, Mike, I want to bounce this off you because I do think Demarcus Robinson is the more reliable option in the red zone. He's not going to get the yards after the catch that Tyler Johnson is, but I do think he's going to gobble up some reception. So I just want to ask you, I kind of like when props come out for this game, I kind of like Tyler Johnson's receiving yards over, but Demarcus Robinson's receptions over. I'm not asking you to co-sign that, but do you see where I'm going with that? Because I think they're both going to be involved, but maybe in different ways.
Yeah, I think they're both going to be heavily involved. I think they're still going to pass the ball a lot. It's going to be a heavy dose of Kyren Williams, and it's going to be peppering those other guys. The only difference is defensively, when you have Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua out there, it makes Cooper Kupp's life a lot easier. Now that Puka Nacua is not out there, Cooper Kupp's just elite. He's going to find his way to get his still, but I do think it's going to open up deep shots down the field to both Johnson and Robinson. The one thing I wanted to talk about quickly on Marvin Harrison, which was fascinating, he was terrible in week 1. It wasn't just the fact that the ball wasn't going his way. These are advanced metrics, of course, but like when you look at things like separation and win rate, he was terrible. In week 1, 78 qualified wide receivers. He was 68th in the NFL in separation, 72nd in route win rate. Buffalo defense is fine, not elite. So, we'll see. Could just be, slow start to week 1. But I think there is a valid reason for him not getting targets. At least that's what the data says.
That's very interesting. Let me ask you this, Meg. Any interest? Let's say you wanted to load up on other games, but you wanted to get pieces of this game. And I think a cheap receiver on the Rams side is going to be like in almost every one of my lineups. But we haven't mentioned James Conner yet. I mean, James Conner played great in week 1. So, I mean, any thoughts on a maybe perhaps contrarian? And Mike, I actually do want to ask you about, it's early, but ownership on Conner. But Meg, any thoughts on James Conner in some lineups?
I think that's another great way to approach this game. I do like Conner, and he's definitely in my running back player pool. So I like that. I'll also throw out one other cheaper receiver that got a decent amount of targets, doesn't have a big ADOT, is Greg Dortch. So you could play it that way too. Just whether it's a skinny stack or with Kyler or with Stafford, that's another option. But I do like the Conner call out, and he definitely is in my running back pool.
And Mike, I mean, he wasn't super efficient on the ground, but any thoughts on James Conner at 6,400?
Yeah, play your James Conner now. He's going to be great until he gets hurt again, right? Yeah. So, the way he plays, he's almost definitely going to be banged up, by week 10 in this season. But I like him when he's healthy, 6,400. Also just think it's a great spot to basically throw him in the flex. And you've got a lot of options, whether you want to play Kyren or him or Pacheco or some of these other guys. The late slate, while there's minimal games, there are a ton of options in that flex. So if you're having 3 running back builds, I've got one on my screen here, essentially, that's got Jordan Mason, Josh Jacobs, and running back Connor in the flex. And then just knowing that, especially if you're playing one of the cheaper tight ends too, you could get very different via late swap to someone like Travis Kelce at tight end, different things. So there's a lot of options. I do have a little bit of Connor, and I think a lot of it is due to the roster construction and having a flex player like that for the afternoon.
Okay, we'll get to Travis Kelce in just a second. One more game before we get to Chiefs, Bengals, and our cheat sheets and Mike's top 3 at each position. This one we're going to go through real quick, like really quick. The Steelers at the Broncos. It's a 36.5 point total. Steelers favored by 2.5 rolling into Denver. Does look like it's going to be Justin Fields. I don't know that that's official. He's 5,400. I could list off these names, but I don't really see the reason to, because I don't think we're going to have a ton of interest in this game. I could be wrong. Meg, I start with you.
I will say we talked about certain pass funnel defenses or secondaries we want to target, like the horrible Washington secondary. You do want to target the Broncos on the ground. And we saw Ken Walker. He made us both all sweat last week, but he got there. And you do want to target the Broncos on the ground. And Najee did get the volume last week. So hopefully if that sticks, I do like Najee as a cheap and contrarian option.
Yeah, Justin says maybe the DST's in this one. Mike, any thoughts in this game?
I don't hate Justin Fields here. He grades out relatively well with Pickens. Fields is someone who's still got the rushing upside, guys. We have to talk about it. 57 yards rushing in that last game. I think that's going to be there. So what's scary about that and why he's almost always viable? You see 12 fantasy points, but like go compare that to what Patrick Mahomes did in week 1, right? It's not far off because of the lack of touchdowns in certain spots. He didn't score a touchdown in this game. No passing touchdowns. The team didn't score a touchdown. He's putting up 12 fantasy points at 5,400 without the team even scoring a touchdown. You've got to take notice because if the team gets in the end zone, it's extremely likely that he's scoring 20 fantasy points at that point. So I think you have to consider it here. And Pickens is clearly that guy. I was not super encouraged with the number of snaps Pickens played because if I were running the team, George Pickens would be, so say we ran 58 offensive snaps, George Pickens would play 58 of them. And that's essentially how it should be. He should be on the field every play. But yeah, I think that in turn, again, this is not cash games. This is not 3 max, none of that. If you're playing a lot of tournaments, I do think that there is some case to be made for a Justin Fields lineup.
Yeah, I don't hate that. All right, I think we can move on to your team, Mike, the Kansas City Chiefs hosting the Cincinnati Bengals. This game feels like it's going under the radar a little bit compared to a couple of the games that we've talked about with slightly higher totals and maybe more excitement on both sides of the ball. With that said, I mean, I think Isaiah Pacheco at 6,900 is going to be pretty popular. Rashee Rice at 6,700 should be pretty popular. Travis Kelce, we'll see at 6,200. Jamar Chase on the other side. T. Higgins, I don't know that he's going to play. What do you like in this one?
I like Mahomes in general. I think he gets back and really has a good game in terms of scoring touchdowns. I think he ran pretty poorly in terms of scoring touchdowns. I know obviously Worthy scored one on a rushing play, Pacheco as well. So I think he runs a lot better in terms of passing touchdowns. As far as options in the receiving game, I think Worthy's always going to be interesting. I think he's going to go over-owned just because of the efficiency we saw in week 1. Rashee Rice will be a target monster, but the guy I really like here is actually Travis Kelce, who was used a bit more as a decoy in week 1. I like him in this matchup against the Cincinnati Bengals, just kind of the way things are going to play. I think they're going to use Worthy to open up the middle of that field. And I think Rice, because of the route tree Rice runs, which is typically that 5-6 yard slant, I think it's going to open things up. If they shut that down, I think it's going to be a Travis Kelce week. So I, could be wrong on it there, but price point wise, I do like Kelce here at 6,400. You're going to have to be extremely sensitive on matchups using him this year. But to me, this projects as a matchup where he will be heavily used, especially in the red zone.
A lot of tight ends looking to bounce back from week 1 for sure. Travis Kelce, certainly one of them. Meg, what do we like in this game?
I mean, Mike makes a great point about Travis Kelce. My favorite player, though, is Isaiah Pacheco. Obviously, he is getting the volume, and I'm leaning into the game script. I'm not impressed with the Bengals at all, obviously, to start the season. They're usually so starters, but it looks really bad to start this, and I don't believe they're going to have Higgins. So I just believe that the Chiefs could be up by a lot. We talked about looking for back and forth games. I don't think this is going to be back and forth. I think Chiefs win easily. So I'm just going to lean into Pacheco and maybe the Chiefs D. But definitely Pacheco is like one of my favorite plays on the slate.
It's impossible to argue with that. Mike, can I ask you from a running back standpoint, ownership, is Pacheco inside the top 3 or 4 from an ownership standpoint?
I do not believe so, but I can pull it up quickly. And as I'm pulling it up, I would say I do love the Kansas City defense here. Just in general, when you look at Burrow, what's really concerning for me with Joe Burrow in Cincinnati is Burrow, I don't think he's healthy for one. He obviously doesn't have T. Higgins right now either. But the New England Patriots defense had the fewest number of quarterback pressures in week 1 out of any team. And we saw how much Burrow struggled when he was not under pressure. That is not going to be the same thing against Spagnuolo, having Chris Jones healthy, Karlaftis. They're going to get after him big time in that spot. So let me find, I'm sorry, guys, I had ownership pulled up. Running backs, Pacheco definitely not near the top. We got Jordan Mason, Kyron Williams, Josh Jacobs, David Montgomery, Breece Hall rounding out the top of the projected ownership.
David Montgomery. That is very interesting. Again, it's Thursday morning, so that could David Montgomery could fall a little bit, but yeah, all of those make sense. So, okay, that's any more comments, Mike? Anything else to say on your Kansas City Chiefs here?
No, I think I'm completely off the Bengals side, and I just calling a Travis Kelce week.
All right, Travis Kelce week. Let's do it. All right, let's do our cheat sheets. Let's do Mike's top 3 at each position. And then for maybe 60 seconds, we'll ask Mike how he is addressing showdown for Thursday night football, Bills, Dolphins. Meg, let's start with your cheat sheet. Everybody, if you're new to the show, this is how we do it. We give out our favorite stack, our favorite chalk play, chalk fade, contrarian play, and value play. Meg, start us off with the stack.
Sure. I talked about it earlier. Love that Bucs Lions game. So Baker Mayfield to Chris Godwin. We saw what Kupp did out of the slot. And so I love Evans too, but you save a little money with Godwin.
Speaking of Kupp, is he your chalk buy? And give us your chalk fade as well.
Absolutely is my chalk buy. Of course, I love Mason too. We'll get to that in a minute, but absolutely Cooper Kupp is going to be in most of my lineups. Chalk buy for that. And chalk fade is, we didn't talk about him, but it looks like Andre Iosivas is, with Higgins out, is going to be pretty chalky, likely with people wanting to force a run back. No need to force a run back, as we talked about in the Chiefs game. I'm fading him and basically all the Bengals, as Mike said.
Absolutely. And then finally, contrarian and value play.
Yeah, I talked about him earlier. It's going to be pick your spots with Derrick Henry, game script dependent, and this is the game script for him. I like him to obviously lean into the run game, have the game script working in his favor. It wasn't last week. It should be this week. And I like him for a potential 2 touchdown over 100-yard bonus game.
I love that. And did you mention your value play?
Oh, I'm sorry. Of course, Jordan Mason is the free square play. But I will say Najee Harris is my contrarian pivot at a similar price point.
Lauren Zablotny, I hope I pronounced that last name right. She says, I'm on PTO this week and finally can catch you live. I'm subscribing, liking, and thank you so much for all your help over the years. Shout out from Baltimore. Ravens fan, Orioles fan, Lauren, I'm sure. Thank you for subscribing and liking. If everybody else could do that as well, that would be amazing. Maybe even reviewing the show. I'll do my cheat sheet real quick because we want to get to Mike's top 3 at each position. Daniel Jones, Malik Neighbors. Sorry, Washington. Listen, you can win this game, but I think it's going to be the Daniel Jones show with his feet and with his arm. This feels like a last chance moment for Daniel Jones to put something on the stat sheet. This is the game to do it. Chalk buys Jordan Mason, free square. That's how I see it. Chalk fade. I'm fading Breece Hall. Listen, I don't like fading a guy that I know Mike McClure likes. That's just going to be my fade because there's other running backs I like. It's not that I dislike Breece Hall. I just like other value better. My contrarian play, speaking of Mike, he likes Chris Olave. I'm going with Chris Olave. I think that's a really interesting spot, kind of like Rashid Shaheed in that game as well if you need a cheaper option. And my value play is going to be Demarcus Robinson in that Rams-Cards game. Tyler Johnson I also like, but I'm just feeling Demarcus Robinson. I like the touchdown equity a little bit more, and I do think he's going to get a lot of targets. All right, Mike, let's get your top 3 at each position. We start at quarterback.
I'm going to have a lot of Matthew Stafford here, just banking on Rams scoring some points. So I love Stafford, Patrick Mahomes, and Jaden Daniels. And then number 4 is likely going to be Daniel Jones where you're at. So for me, it's Stafford, Mahomes, and Daniels, top 3 quarterbacks for me.
And top 3 running backs, two of them I just mentioned. Talk to us about the 3.
Yeah, it's Jordan Mason, free square for now. And then Breece Hall, Josh Jacobs, just volume plays here for me. Josh Jacobs at 6,500 in this situation is nearly identical to the misprice on Cooper Kupp. And it's not that there was a misprice in a normal situation. It's a misprice now considering the usage and the injury situation. So love Josh Jacobs, going to touch the ball 30 times. Breece Hall, I expect a similar workload. I do think that Tennessee will not be able to keep the offense off the field like San Francisco was able to do at key moments. And I think the weather's a factor as well. So Jordan Mason, Breece Hall, Josh Jacobs.
And wide receiver.
Cooper Kupp, very close to a free square to me with Jordan Mason. There's just enough value to make it work. Malik Neighbors, very encouraged what I saw last week and a much better matchup defensively. The yards after catch are going to be there. He lands in the end zone at least once in this matchup. 100-yard game. Love me some Malik Neighbors. Yes, that means go bet over 62.5 yards. Yes, do it. Chris Godwin, too cheap as well. I like Chris Godwin. I think that the Bucs are going to have some success, but way more resistance defensively, which is likely to hurt the deep ball to Mike Evans more than the middle of the field. So Cooper Kupp, Malik Neighbors, Chris Godwin.
All right. And your top 3 tight ends.
Yeah, tight end's kind of a wasteland. I will be paying up for some Travis Kelce, but Jatavian Sanders for the Carolina Panthers, I think he's going to be the safety valve for Bryce Young. I think he's going to have some targets here. Jordan Akins for the Cleveland Browns. I think we've seen him in his career with Houston really excel given the opportunity. and the opportunity is going to be there. He caught 4 balls last week with Njoku in, and David Njoku is now ruled out. So we think the Browns are going to struggle. Jatavian Sanders, Jordan Akins, and Travis Kelce.
Okay. And by the way, before we get to just a quick comment on Showdown, I think it was Aaron Bailey and Francois, maybe a couple other that are apparently new to DFS. Thank you for being in here, by the way. Francois says, hello, Sia. Happy fantasy to all here in DC, by the way. That's awesome. Can you tell me what a run back is? So I'll just keep it super simple. So when you're in a game that you think there's going to be scoring back and forth, you don't only want one side of the ball, you want the other side of the ball as well in most cases, but not in all cases. So for example, in that Cardinals-Rams game, let's say you want to play Matt Stafford to Cooper Kupp, you don't have to, you may want to, quote, run it back with an Arizona player or two. It could be Marvin Harrison, it could be Trey McBride, it could be James Conner, and it could be nobody. But when we refer to run backs, we're referring to the other side of the ball. Again, games we're investing with like players on one side of the ball, we're doing that in part because we think the game's going to be high scoring. One thing that drives high scoring games is scoring on both sides of the ball. So a lot of times we want to run back because we believe the other side of the ball is going to be good as well. I hope that explained it. Meg, did I do a good job there? I saw you nodding in approval.
Absolutely. I think you did a perfect job.
Awesome. All right, Mike, we've got a showdown tonight. I'm not asking you to give out a lineup or even like a play or two. I mean, you can if you want, but how do you attack this showdown slate? A couple of high flyers, the Bills and the Dolphins.
Yeah, I mean, I think you want the studs at the top. Fortunately for Buffalo, I think they're way more playable now in Showdown because you don't have the high-priced Stephon Diggs and have to worry about targets and stuff going that way. So you're playing Josh Allen for sure. There's zero scenario in which Josh Allen doesn't make your lineup. The question is, you playing him at captain or not? And same goes for Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill, Josh Allen. Going to have heavy ownership, should be in all of your lineups. Jeff Wilson Jr. likely going to be in a lot of your lineups, even if Achane goes. Achane is probably going to go. I think he's unlikely to get goal line carries, though, in this matchup. And then flyers for the for the Buffalo Bills side. I love James Cook as well. I'm not a flyer, obviously, but it's just the running volume. I think they're going to run a ton. But Marquez Valdez-Scantling and Mac Hollins. Valdez-Scantling is going to be the big deep ball threat. Hollins is going to be over the middle of the field. I know that we saw Keon Coleman have all the first look reads in week 1. I don't think first look's going to be there in this matchup. One critical thing in this matchup here, Miami brought in Poyer from the Bills over the offseason, and that is almost exclusively to try and beat the Bills in certain matchups, not necessarily because of his individual skill. And I think that shows up, but I think it's Josh Allen running a lot of James Cook. So I think that if you want to pay down for guys like Hollins and Valdez-Scantling to make things work, there are many scenarios where you get Tyreek Hill, Josh Allen, Tua and Waddle, or Tua and Achane all in lineups very, very easily tonight.
Showdown is back, Meg, when we're talking Mac Hollins and Marquez Valdez-Scantling. I absolutely love it. And if you want to hear more from Mike, he's going to be on CBS Sports Network to break down week 2 of the NFL games, again, on CBS Sports Network at 2:00. Mike, he's going to be all over the place. HQ. There's so much content coming up from Meg, from Mike, and actually from myself as well. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. We went a few minutes over what we normally like to do, but we had so much ground to cover with the 13 games and a couple of extra things that we're throwing into this show. I guess that'll do it. On behalf of Meg Shoup, on behalf of Mike McClure and myself, and of course, Nada on the 1s and 2s, bringing that DraftKings screen up, just toggling back and forth. He has been amazing as usual. Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next Thursday at 11 o'clock. Ask us any questions on Twitter that you like. Have a great weekend. Let's cash some tickets on the week 2 slate, or cash some lineups, I should say. This is Fantasy Football Today, DFS.